Okay! The Super Mario Bros. Movie has been out for a while now, and while I haven't made a review for the movie, let me just say that I absolutely loved it. Now, the movie wasn't perfect by any means, but as far as adapting Mario to the big screen goes, I think that they did an amazing job. This is probably my favorite movie that Illumination has put out, aside from maybe the first Despicable Me movie. The general audience seems to absolutely adore this film, and it's currently the highest grossing video game adaptation of all time. But this video isn't meant to talk about the movie as a whole. Tons of other people are already doing that with their reviews and breakdowns and whatnot. No, I want to talk about one of the specific characters that really made the movie for me. Donkey Kong. Now, in my last video about this, I touched on the idea of Donkey Kong making a big comeback, and his portrayal in this movie really solidified that for me. DK made his entrance in the movie in such a bombastic and energetic way that just felt so right for the character. I don't want to give too much away, but from the moment that Mario, Peach, and Toad entered the Jungle Kingdom, I could tell that this movie had just as much love for Donkey Kong as it did for Mario. So I don't think that there's any way that Illumination and Nintendo aren't at least considering a Donkey Kong solo film. But a movie is just one piece of what I think is a much larger comeback for Donkey Kong. The theme park expansion is another big sign that Nintendo really wants to bring DK back into the spotlight again. We already know that Nintendo and Universal have plans to expand Super Nintendo World with a Donkey Kong themed area, and from concept art, it seems like it's going to be a fairly sizable expansion, and we can already see teases of it in Super Nintendo World Japan, with the Donkey Kong themed gateways around the park that will eventually lead to the new DK area once that's complete. But I just find it interesting that Nintendo is choosing Donkey Kong for the expansion for Super Nintendo World. They could have gone with Yoshi's Island, Luigi's Mansion, or even another Nintendo franchise that's not connected to Mario like Zelda or Kirby, but instead they chose DK. And while yes, Donkey Kong has always been seen as sort of an extension of the Mario universe, it just feels like a lot of things are really starting to come together. Universal owns both Super Nintendo World as well as Illumination Studios, so now you got DK showing up at the movies in a larger role, you have him getting his own expansion at the park. I just feel like Nintendo and Universal are really cooking up something here. Which brings me to arguably the most important part of this comeback, the games. It's been a good while since we've gotten an original Donkey Kong game. Tropical Freeze came out on the Wii U in 2014, and so we haven't gotten an original Donkey Kong game for 9 years. It really makes me think that Nintendo is really taking their time and trying to get it right when bringing DK back. And of course, there have been countless rumors over the years as well. 3D games, 2D games, evidence of a scrapped open world game from Activision of all studios, and we still have yet to see anything really come into fruition. I think there's a reason for that. So now this is where we get into real speculative territory. I believe that Nintendo is setting up for somewhat of a reinvention of the Donkey Kong IP. I still think that there's a reason that Miyamoto made sure to point out Donkey Kong's movie redesign and how it goes back to Donkey Kong's original design from the arcade in some way. The design change isn't massive, but Miyamoto still made it a point to acknowledge that it was a redesign. He didn't talk about this for Mario, Luigi, Toad, Peach, just for DK, so I would honestly not be surprised if this redesign could extend beyond the movie universe into the park and possibly the games. I know that it might be divisive among fans, but I personally think that a new take on the character could be really interesting for mixing up the series. So now we gotta talk about what we could actually see for DK's future adventures. First off, I think we need to see Donkey Kong return to 3D. The only time Donkey Kong had a 3D video game was DK64. Now, that game had its flaws, but it was also a really good take on trying to put the series into a 3D space, and I think it's time that Nintendo tries that again. Now, with Rare being owned by Microsoft, I have to wonder who would take on a new 3D Donkey Kong. I don't think it would be done by Retro since they have their hands full with Metroid at the moment, so the studio who I think would be the right fit is actually the Odyssey team. As much as I want a new 3D Mario from them again, I also think it would be super cool to see their take on DK. Give him as much love as they did for Mario, really make it a celebration of Donkey Kong's legacy. Bring back K. Rool as the villain, have a bunch of Kongs that we haven't seen for a while show up, reference the arcade games a lot more. I would love to see a big AAA title like this to mark Donkey Kong's grand return. But even if the entry isn't fully 3D like Odyssey, I also wouldn't be opposed to seeing an entry more like 3D World featuring the Kong crew. This would allow for a lot of the tight 2D platforming that the DK games are already known for, but with that extra dimension that would allow for a lot more experimentation with with the standard Donkey Kong Country formula. Which finally brings us to 2D. This is an idea that draws a lot of inspiration from the Mario movie. I want to see something new done with 2D Donkey Kong. I feel like the country formula truly peaked in Tropical Freeze, in the same way that I think that 2D Mario has peaked in the new Super Mario Bros. Style. So I figured, why not kill two birds with one stone? This isn't really a spoiler since it shows up in the trailers, but there's a point in the movie where DK and Mario team up with power-ups, and it goes into this action sequence that mimics the 2D platformer style that we're used to. I would love to see them do something like that for a game. Have DK and Mario team up in some way, either working together or switching off between the two characters to do different things within a level. I just feel like when two of Nintendo's biggest characters with so much history between each other both come from primarily platforming games, it feels like a crossover between the two would have been a given at this point. And I'm not talking about games like Mario vs. Donkey Kong, because we still see them pit up against each other. It's like, no, I want to see them put their rivalry aside and team up for a game for once. I just think that would be a really cool thing to see. But those are just some of my ideas for how Donkey Kong could come back. I would love to see some of your ideas down in the comments below. And I honestly don't think it could be too long before we hear something about Donkey Kong. We got CinemaCon at the end of this month with Universal announcing their slate. We got Nintendo's investor meeting at the beginning of May. So I have a feeling that we could see something announced about DK in either the movies or in the games fairly soon. I just think that Donkey Kong is such an iconic character for Nintendo, and I really want to see him get the love that he deserves. But for now, I think that's enough out of me. So if you guys like this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Later.